It was supposed to be a fresh start, leaving the city behind, trading sirens for silence. That was the dream anyway. When I got the job as a park ranger in Redwood National Park, California, it felt like everything was falling into place. Towering redwood trees, misty trails, the Pacific coast nearby, nature was calling, and I was answering. My first assignment, patrol the Shadow Creek Trail area. Remote, they said. Peaceful, they promised. Driving in on that winding park road, sunlight filtering through the colossal trees, I almost believed them. Almost. But as I got closer to the ranger station, a different feeling started creeping in. The air grew heavy, the sunlight seemed to dim even under the giant redwoods, and a thick silence settled over everything. It wasn't the peaceful silence of nature, it was expectant. Like the forest was holding its breath. The ranger station itself was a small, old cabin tucked away in a clearing. Smoke curled from the chimney, a thin grey thread against the green canopy. Standing outside, leaning against a porch railing, was Ranger Morales. She was older, maybe late 50s, with a weathered face and eyes that looked like they'd seen a few things. She didn't smile when I pulled up. "You must be the new guy," she said, her voice gravelly, like dry leaves crunching underfoot. "Alex, right?" I nodded, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "Yeah, Alex Walker. First day." She just grunted, glancing at the sky, which was starting to look bruised with approaching clouds. "Road's clear now. Won't be for long. Weather here changes on a dime." "Redwood weather. Right," I said, feeling a little awkward. I expected a warmer welcome, maybe some friendly advice. "Come on in," she finally said, pushing open the cabin door. Inside, the station was basic: a couple of desks, a radio setup, a kitchen corner, and the smell of wood smoke, and something else's, something faintly metallic, like old pennies. Another ranger was inside, sitting at a desk by the window, staring out at the trees. He was younger, maybe my age, with intense, dark eyes and a quiet stillness about him. Morales didn't introduce us right away. Morales gestured to a large map spread out on a table. "This is your area, Shadow Creek Trail and the surrounding woods. Patrol for anything out of place: illegal camping, fire hazards, injured hikers, wildlife trouble, usual ranger stuff." She pointed to a section of the map, a dense green patch marked Shadow Creek Wilderness. "Mostly quiet, but it gets visitors. Trail's popular, especially on weekends. Just keep an eye on things." "And him?" I asked, nodding towards the ranger by the window. Morales glanced over. "That's Ben. Ben Carter. He's been here a while." Her tone was vague, like she didn't want to elaborate. Ben didn't even look up, still staring out the window. I decided to introduce myself anyway. "Hey Ben, Alex Walker. Good to meet you." Ben finally turned, his dark eyes fixing on me. There was something unsettling in his gaze, like he was looking right through me. "Welcome to Shadow Creek," he said, his voice low and flat, devoid of any warmth. Then he turned back to the window, dismissing me. Morales cleared her throat, bringing my attention back to the map. "Shadow Creek Trail is about 10 miles long, loops around. Good mix of terrain. You'll get to know it." "Anything specific I should be looking out for?" I asked, trying to get a sense of what wildlife trouble might mean in Redwood National Park. "Bears. Mountain lions." Morales hesitated for a moment, then shrugged. "Just be aware. This forest, it's old. Things happen out here." "Things?" I prompted, sensing she wasn't telling me everything. She sighed, rubbing her hand over her tired eyes. "Look, kid, Redwood's beautiful, but it's also wild. Respect it. Stick to the trails, especially after dark. And if you hear something that doesn't sound like it belongs, just keep moving." Her words hung in the air, heavy and vague. Before I could ask her to explain, the radio crackled to life, and she turned to answer it, her attention already elsewhere. My first few patrols were uneventful. The trail was beautiful, sunlight dappling through the ancient trees, the air cool and damp. Hikers were friendly, mostly families and older couples enjoying the scenery. I saw deer, squirrels, birds, the usual forest wildlife. But even in the daytime, there was an undercurrent of unease. The silence was too deep, the shadows too long, and Morales' words kept echoing in my head. "If you hear something that doesn't sound like it belongs." One evening, back at the station, I was making dinner in the small kitchen when Ben finally spoke to me, unprompted. He walked in, silent as a shadow, and leaned against the counter, watching me. "Morals tell you about the sounds?" he asked, his voice still flat, but with a hint of something else now: curiosity, or maybe warning. I turned, surprised he was talking to me. "Sounds? She just said to listen out for things that don't belong." Ben nodded slowly. That's her way of putting it. Locals call them the creek whispers. Creek whispers, I frowned, flipping a veggie burger in the pan. What are those? He hesitated again, his dark eyes fixed on me. Some say it's just the wind in the canyons. Others say it's something else. Something old. Something that doesn't like people on the trail after dark. A chill prickled my skin, despite the warm stove. And you, what do you think they are? Ben just stared at me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he turned and walked back to his desk by the window, leaving me alone with the sizzling burger and the growing knot of unease in my stomach. Later that night, after Morales had gone to bed in her small room at the back of the cabin, I found myself unable to sleep. The wind had picked up, rustling the redwood needles outside, and the cabin creaked and groaned in the gusts. But beneath the natural sounds, I thought I heard something else, faint, indistinct, like whispers on the edge of hearing. I sat up in bed, straining to listen. Was it just the wind playing tricks? Or was it something else? Something Morales and Ben were hinting at. The whispers seemed to grow a little louder, weaving in and out of the wind, just at the edge of perception. They weren't words, not really. More like sighs. Or maybe calls. A shiver ran down my spine. I told myself it was just the wind, just my imagination running wild on my first week in a new, isolated place. But deep down, a cold seed of doubt had been planted. And as I lay there in the darkness, listening to the whispers in the wind, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone in the silence of Shadow Creek Trail. That something was out there, watching, waiting, and whispering my name on the wind. The next day, the whispers were still on my mind. I tried to brush them off as nervous, rookie jitters, but the feeling lingered. Even the bright California sunshine filtering through the redwoods couldn't quite dispel the chill that had settled in. Morales assigned Ben and me to patrol the Shadow Creek Trail together. I was hoping to get some answers from him about the creek whispers, but Ben was even more withdrawn than usual. He walked in silence, his gaze fixed on the trail ahead, like he was expecting something to jump out from the shadows. The trail was busier than I'd seen it. A Saturday crowd enjoying the redwood giants. Families with kids, serious hikers with backpacks and trekking poles, couples strolling hand in hand, the usual weekend mix. But even with the people around, the forest felt different, quieter somehow. The birds were silent, the squirrels were hidden, and the usual background hum of the woods was muted, replaced by that heavy, expectant stillness. We hiked for a couple of hours, checking permits, answering questions about trail conditions, the usual ranger routine. Everything seemed normal on the surface, but the silence was getting to me. I felt like we were walking through a soundproof room, cut off from the natural world. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I had to break the silence, even if Ben wasn't exactly chatty. So, Ben, I started, trying to sound casual. Those creek whispers you mentioned, you ever actually heard them? Ben stopped walking, turning to face me. His dark eyes were intense, almost unsettlingly so. You heard them last night, didn't you? He said, his voice low. It wasn't a question. I hesitated, then nodded. Yeah, faint, like whispers, but I thought it was just the wind. He shook his head slowly. It's not the wind, Alex. Not always. Then what is it? I pressed, finally getting the conversation I'd been hoping for. Ben looked around, like he was checking to make sure no one else was listening, even though we were alone on a quiet stretch of the trail. This forest, it's old, Alex. Older than you can imagine. Redwoods, they've seen things, heard things. He paused, his gaze drifting up to the towering trees, their tops lost in the mist. Some places, some trails, they hold on to things, memories. Things that get left behind. Left behind by who? I asked, feeling a prickle of unease. He shrugged, a dismissive gesture that didn't quite hide the seriousness in his eyes. Loggers. People who got lost. People who died out here. My stomach tightened. You're saying the creek whispers are ghosts? I asked, trying to keep a skeptical tone. Ben didn't answer directly. He just looked at me, his gaze intense. They're the forest remembering, Alex. And sometimes the forest remembers things it shouldn't. He started walking again, leaving me standing there, staring after him, the silence of the woods suddenly feeling a lot more ominous. I hurried to catch up, my mind racing. Ghosts. Really? It sounded like something out of a campfire story. But the way Ben said it, he believed it. And that was more unsettling than any ghost story. We continued the patrol in silence, the rest of the day thankfully uneventful. But the feeling of being watched, of being listened to, intensified. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig made me jump. I kept glancing into the deeper shadows between the redwoods, half expecting to see what I didn't even know. Something pale and gaunt, like in a nightmare. That evening, Morels was called out to deal with a minor incident at the park entrance, leaving just Ben and me at the station. The storm clouds that had been threatening all day finally broke, and rain lashed against the cabin windows, driven by a rising wind. The power flickered, then died, plunging the station into darkness, except for the fire in the hearth. Ben didn't seem fazed by the power outage. He just sat at his desk by the window, staring out into the storm-swept darkness, the firelight flickering across his face. I lit a couple of oil lamps, the dim yellow light barely pushing back the shadows in the small cabin. "Power goes out a lot here," I said, trying to make conversation to break the heavy silence that had descended again. Ben just grunted in response, still staring out the window. "So," I tried again, "those creek whispers, have you ever seen anything out there? Besides, the wind?" This time, his dark eyes catching the lamplight, making them seem to glow faintly. He looked at me for a long moment and then, slowly, he nodded. "Once," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, the fire crackling in the silence. "A long time ago, when I first started here. Night patrol up near the old logging camp." He paused, staring into the fire now, his expression distant. "Heard my name called, whispering on the wind. Thought it was another ranger playing a joke. Called back. No answer." He shivered, even in the warmth of the fire. Kept hearing it though. Closer, closer. Like it was circling me. "What did you do?" I asked, my voice hushed, drawn in by his story. "Ran," he said simply. "Ran like hell. Didn't stop running till I was back at the station. Didn't go back on night patrol for months." He fell silent again, staring into the fire, lost in his memory. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows, and the rain beat against the roof like frantic fingers. The firelight danced, casting long, flickering shadows that seemed to writhe and twist in the corners of the cabin. "Hey, what did you see?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Ben shook his head slowly, his eyes still fixed on the flames. "Didn't see anything. Just felt it. Felt something watching." Well, he looked up at me then, his dark eyes locking onto mine. "You hear the whispers, Alex. Be careful. This forest, it listens, and sometimes it answers." The wind howled again, louder this time, and I could have sworn, just for a moment, I heard something else in the wind. Faint, indistinct, like whispers on the edge of hearing. Whispers that seemed to be calling my name. A cold dread settled over me, deeper and darker than anything I'd felt before. The fire crackled, the rain lashed, and in the flickering lamplight, Ben's face was pale, his eyes filled with a fear that mirrored my own. We were alone in the dark cabin, surrounded by the ancient, whispering redwoods. And I had the terrifying feeling that something out there was listening to every word, waiting for us to step outside, into the deeper shadows of Shadow Creek Trail. Sleep was a lost cause that night. Every creak of the cabin, every gust of wind, every rustle of leaves outside sounded like footsteps, like whispers drawing closer. I lay in bed, staring up at the dark ceiling, the oil lamp on my bedside table casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to mock me. Ben stayed up by the window, silent and watchful, a dark figure outlined against the storm-racked trees. He didn't say anything more, but his presence was a kind of grim comfort, a shared vigil against the unseen. The storm raged through the night, and with it, the whispers seemed to grow stronger, more insistent. They weren't just in the wind anymore, they were everywhere, inside my head, just at the edge of hearing, a constant maddening murmur. Sometimes, I thought I could almost make out words. Fragments of sentences, my name repeated over and over, in voices that sounded vaguely familiar, yet chillingly wrong. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving behind a dripping, mist-shrouded forest. The power was still out, and the cabin felt cold and damp. Morales returned, looking tired and harassed, but seemingly oblivious to the oppressive atmosphere that had settled over the station. "Rough night," she said, pouring herself a cup of coffee from a thermos. "Anything happen here?" Ben and I exchanged a look. What could we say? Oh, just the ancient forest spirits whispering our names all night, no big deal. "Just the storm," I said, forcing a casual tone. Ben remained silent, still staring out the window, his coffee untouched. Morales shrugged, accepting my answer without question. She was all business, focused on the day's tasks. She assigned me to solo patrol of the Redwood Creek section of the trail, a longer, more isolated loop than Shadow Creek. My stomach clenched. Solo deeper into the woods. Exactly what I didn't want. You sure about that? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Maybe today we should stick together, given the weather last night. I trailed off, knowing it sounded weak, like an excuse. Morals frowned at me, her gaze sharp. Walker, you're a ranger. Solo patrol is part of the job. Can't hold your hand every step of the way. Get out there, keep your eyes open and do your job. That was that. No arguing with morals. I nodded, grabbed my gear, and headed out, the weight of her words and the unspoken dread of the forest heavy on my shoulders. Redwood Creek Trail was even more isolated than Shadow Creek. The trees were thicker, the shadows deeper, and the silence it was almost deafening. The mist hung heavy, clinging to the redwood needles, muffling every sound. It felt like walking through a grey, silent world, cut off from everything familiar. As I hiked deeper into the woods, the whispers started again. Faint, at first, just at the edge of hearing, like the wind sighing through the trees. But they grew louder, more insistent, weaving in and out of the natural sounds, becoming more distinct, more directed. They were calling my name. Alexa, Alexa, whispered on the breeze, murmured from the shadows, echoing in the silence. My name, spoken in voices that were both familiar and alien, laced with a chilling undercurrent of hunger. Longing, I couldn't tell. It was just wrong. I tried to ignore them, to focus on my patrol, checking trail markers, scanning for hazards. But the whispers were relentless, a constant, maddening distraction, gnawing at my nerves, fraying my sanity. Alex, come closer, were waiting. My pace quickened, my breath catching in my throat. I started to feel like I was being followed, watched from the shadows. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig made me spin around, my heart hammering in my chest. But there was never anything there. Just the silent trees, the swirling mist, and the whispers on the wind. Then, I heard a different sound. Faint at first, but distinct from the whispers. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, crunching on the fallen redwood needles behind me. Someone was following me. I stopped dead, my hand instinctively reaching for the radio on my belt. Morales, Ben, anyone I think someone's behind me on Redwood Creek Trail. My voice trembled, betraying my fear. Silence. Only static on the radio, of course. Remote patrol, deep in the woods, radio dead. Perfect. The footsteps continued, steady, getting closer. I turned slowly, my heart pounding, my eyes scanning the mist, shrouded trail behind me. Nothing. Just the empty trail, disappearing into the grey silence. But the footsteps, they were still there, just out of sight, just around the bend in the trail. Alex. The whispers were louder now, closer, almost in my ear. Don't be afraid, we just want to talk. With footsteps like that, with whispers that chilled me to the bone. No way, my instincts screamed at me to run. But run where? Deeper into the woods, back towards whatever was behind me. I stood frozen, caught between fear and indecision, the footsteps drawing closer, the whispers swirling around me, calling my name, promising something. Something I didn't want to know. Then, through the mist, I saw it. A figure moving slowly, deliberately emerging from the shadows between the trees. Pale, indistinct, shrouded in the mist, but undeniably there. Coming towards me. My breath hitched in my throat. It was just a hiker, maybe. Lost, injured, but something about the way it moved, the way it seemed to glide through the mist. The sheer wrongness of its presence, it sent a jolt of pure terror through me. Alex. The whispers coalesced into a voice, closer now, clearer, right in front of me, even though the figure was still some distance away. A voice that sounded like mine, but twisted, distorted, hollowed out like an echo from a nightmare. We've been waiting for you. The figure kept coming slow, steady, relentless. And in that moment, staring into the mist, listening to my own voice, twisted and corrupted, calling me closer. I knew this was a hiker. This wasn't human. This was the whispers made flesh, the forest answering, and it was coming for me. Terror let me speed. I turned and ran, not thinking, not looking back, just running, blindly, desperately, back the way I'd come, the whispers echoing behind me, now laced with a chilling, triumphant laughter. The hunt was on, and I was the prey. I ran like my life depended on it, because it did. The trail blurred beneath my feet, the trees whipping past in a green and grey rush. Behind me, the whispers turned into a chorus, a cacophony of voices, all calling my name, all laced with that chilling, distorted echo of my own voice. Alex, Alex, come back, we're lonely. The footsteps behind me were impossibly fast, closing the distance with terrifying speed. I risked a glance over my shoulder and caught a glimpse of it through the mist. Taller now, more defined, no longer just a vague figure. Pale skin stretched taut over a skeletal frame, long, spindly limbs, and eyes that burned with a cold blue light. The thing from my nightmares made real. Terror lent me a burst of adrenaline. I pushed myself harder, ignoring the burning in my lungs, the stitch in my side, the screams of my protesting muscles. I had to get back to the station, Morils, Ben. Maybe the radio would work closer to the cabin. Maybe there was still a chance. But the whispers were inside my head now, not just around me. They were in my thoughts, twisting my fear, amplifying my panic. Nowhere to run, Alex, nowhere to hide, were already inside you. I stumbled, nearly fell, catching myself on a redwood trunk, splinters digging into my hand. I kept running. The image of that gaunt figure burned into my mind, those glowing blue eyes, that distorted, mocking voice. Then, ahead on the trail, I saw something that made my heart leap with a desperate kind of hope. Sunlight, breaking through the mist, illuminating a patch of the trail ahead. The edge of the woods. The clearing around the ranger station. Salvation. I pushed myself to a final sprint, bursting out of the trees and into the clearing, stumbling towards the cabin, the whispers still echoing in my ears, but fainter now, receding with the shadows of the deep woods. The station was there, small, solid, a beacon of safety in the swirling mist. Smoke still curled from the chimney, a thin plume of normalcy in the nightmare. I slammed the cabin door shut behind me, fumbling with the latch, bolting it closed, my hands shaking so badly I could barely work the lock. Inside, the cabin was dim, lit only by the fire in the hearth. Empty. Morels and Ben were gone. A fresh wave of despair washed over me, and again. But then, I saw a note on the table, weighted down by a radio, Morotting powers out. Generator shed. Back soon. Bem. The generator. Power. Raid again. Hope tiny spark in the overwhelming darkness. The generator shed. I remembered seeing it behind the cabin, a small metal outbuilding. If I could get the generator started, get the radio working, maybe I could call for help. Maybe I could get out of this. I grabbed the rifle, checked the magazine, and crept to the back door of the cabin, peering out into the mist. The generator's shed was just a few yards away, but the space between felt like a vast, terrifying distance. The whispers fainter here, but still present, still calling, still watching. Taking a deep breath, I unbolted the back door and darted out into the mist, sprinting towards the generator's shed, my heart pounding, every nerve screaming. I fumbled with the latch on the shed door, my fingers clumsy with fear, finally throwing it open and stumbling inside. The shed was small, cramped, filled with the smell of gasoline and oil. The generator was there, a bulky, metal machine, thankfully not too complicated looking. I found the starter cord, pulled it, nothing. Again, harder this time. The engine coughed, sputtered, then roared to life, filling the shed with a vibrating, blessedly loud noise that drowned out the whispers, at least for a moment. Light flooded the cabin as the power flickered back on. I scrambled back inside, grabbing the radio, my hands trembling as I switched it on, frantically dialing for dispatch. Dispatch, this is Ranger Walker, Pine Creek Station, Redwood National Park. Mayday, mayday. Emergency situation, need immediate assistance. Repeat, mayday. Silence. My heart sank. Dead air. Still, the generator was running, the lights were on, but the radio was useless. Trapped. Then a voice, not from the radio, but from the cabin itself. Faint, distorted, chillingly familiar. Alex, we're disappointed. The whispers were inside the cabin now. The lights flickered again, then dimmed, the warm yellow glow replaced by a cold, sickly blue light that pulsed and throbbed, casting long, grotesque shadows that danced and writhed on the walls. The temperature in the cabin plummeted, the air growing icy, my breath fogging in front of my face. The wooden walls creaked and groaned, like something heavy was pressing against them, trying to get in. You can't escape us. Alex, this forest is ours, and now you are too. The voices were all around me, swirling, echoing, suffocating. I backed away, clutching the rifle, my eyes darting around the cabin, searching for anything. A weapon, an escape route, a miracle. My gaze fell on the fireplace, the dying embers glowing faintly in the dim, blue light. Fire. Ben had said something about fire. The Wendigo fears fire, Wendigo. Creek whispers. Whatever it was, maybe fire would work. Maybe it was the only chance I had left. Desperation lent me strength. I grabbed the oil lamp from the table, the flame flickering wildly in the unnatural light, and hurled it into the fireplace. The lamp shattered, oil splashing onto the dying embers, igniting with a sudden, whooshing roar. Flames erupted, licking up the chimney, pushing back the shadows, banishing the cold, blue light with a warm, flickering orange glow. The whispers recoiled, fading back, retreating from the sudden burst of heat and light. The cabin seemed to breathe again, the oppressive atmosphere lifting slightly, replaced by the crackling warmth of the fire. I grabbed more wood, throwing it onto the flames, feeding the fire, building it higher, hotter, a roaring barrier against the darkness, against the whispers, against whatever was out there waiting in the woods. I huddled by the fire, rifle in hand, watching the flames dance, listening to the crackle and roar, the only sound now in the sudden, blessed silence. The whispers were gone. For now. But I knew they were still out there, in the shadows, beyond the firelight, waiting for the flames to die down, waiting for me to step outside, waiting to claim me for the forest. Hours crawled by. The fire burned low, then lower. I fed it more wood, rationing the dwindling supply, knowing I couldn't keep it going forever. The first hint of dawn began to lighten the sky, a pale grey glow filtering through the mist-shrouded windows. And then, through the trees, I heard it. A sound that wasn't whispers, wasn't wind, wasn't the crackling fire. A different sound. Faint, but unmistakable. Helicopter blades, chopping through the air, growing louder, closer, rescue. Relief washed over me, so intense it almost buckled my knees. I stumbled to the door, unbolted it, and threw it open, stepping out into the cold, grey dawn, the firelight spilling out behind me, chasing back the shadows. The helicopter appeared above the trees, rotors churning. Descending towards the clearing, I waved frantically, shouting, tears streaming down my face, a broken, sobbing sound of pure, unadulterated relief. They landed, rangers and paramedics rushing out. Surrounding me, voices asking questions, hands checking me for injuries. I could barely speak, just point back at the forest, towards the shadows, towards the whispers that were finally, truly silent. I was airlifted out of Shadow Creek, out of Redwood National Park, back to the world of sunlight and noise and people. Back to safety. But safety is relative, isn't it? They say they found the station empty, except for me, huddled by the dying fire. No sign of Morales or Ben, no sign of anything else. Just the silent, ancient redwoods and the whispering creek, flowing on, indifferent to the terror held within its shadows. I'm in a new park now, far from Redwood, far from Shadow Creek. A busy, well-maintained park full of tourists and noise and life. Safe, they say. But sometimes, when the wind blows just right, when the shadows lengthen in the evening, when the silence deepens in the woods, I still hear them. Faint, indistinct, just at the edge of hearing. The whispers, calling my name, and I know deep down that they're still out there, waiting, remembering, and listening. Because once Shadow Creek whispers your name, it never truly lets you go.